For something like this, she would probably burn in hell, though maybe that was the point. The first time I found the blue leather journal wedged beneath a pile of scarves in my mother's cedar chest, the smell of mothballs and lavender nearly made me choke. It was months after her funeral, the day when my brother insisted we finally divide her things. He took the china set, the silver spoons, all the pieces that reminded him of holidays and stability. I stayed behind when he left, because something in me wasn't ready to let go. I dug deeper, searching for keepsakes, for some piece of her I could carry that wasn't just a necklace or a photo. That was when I saw the thin ribbon poking out, stained dark at the edge as though dipped in wine. I pulled it free, and with it came a weight I couldn't have explained. The journal was heavy in my hands, not in mass but in presence, as if every line was pressing against me, desperate to be read. At first I thought it was her grocery lists, her recipes maybe, but the moment I cracked it open and saw the first entry, my heart clenched. She had written it to herself, confessions she had never meant for anyone to hear. She wrote of betrayals that didn't belong in a marriage, of lies told at family tables, of nights spent planning not reconciliation but vengeance. I had always known my mother to be stern, demanding, sometimes cold, but this was different. In her handwriting, sharp and slanted, she confessed to sabotaging her sister's marriage, to setting fires of rumor that destroyed friendships, to manipulating the very people she claimed to love most. She wrote with an honesty so cruel it felt like a knife against my skin. One passage in particular twisted my stomach. If they knew what I truly did, they would strip me of the name of mother. But they will never know. My daughter will think me proud, upright, strong. And if one day she finds this, perhaps she will understand that strength is nothing without vengeance. My hands shook as I turned the pages, reading more than I wanted to, feeling the ground tilt under me. There were names of people I still saw in town, neighbors, old family friends. There were stories I had heard growing up, retold in our kitchen as if they were innocent anecdotes. But here they appeared as battles, victories my mother claimed with bitter pride. She described how she exposed a cousin's secrets to ruin her engagement, how she stole money from an aunt to force her dependence, how she manipulated my father during his weakest years. It was not only shocking, it was monstrous. And yet I couldn't stop. Every line drew me deeper into a world where my mother was not the woman I had buried, but a stranger wearing her face. My chest tightened when I found my own name scrawled in the margin of one entry, written almost as an afterthought. Emily will inherit my silence, whether she chooses to or not. I slammed the journal shut, breath caught in my throat, my pulse racing like I'd been caught committing a crime. In the silence of that cedar-scented room, I felt her presence as though she were standing right behind me, daring me to keep reading, daring me to carry the truth. I told myself I would hide it back under the scarves, forget I had ever seen it. But the leather cover was warm against my palms, pulsing with a strange kind of life. That night, I couldn't sleep, my mind replaying every page I had seen. By dawn, I knew I had no choice. I had to read all of it. If the woman who raised me was not who I thought, then I couldn't walk away from her ghost pretending everything was fine. So I locked my door, opened the journal again, and let myself fall. What I didn't know then was how much it would cost me. The secrets in those blue pages were not content to stay buried. They were hungry, dangerous, written in ink that bled into my reality. And the more I read, the more I began to see the cracks in my world widening, threatening to swallow me whole. The deeper I sank into the journal, the heavier the air around me became, like reading aloud the names of the dead and knowing they could hear you. Each confession carried weight, not just because of the cruelty, but because every name was real. People who still walked down the main street of our town, people who smiled at me in the grocery store. My mother had been weaving strings around them all, pulling until they broke, then tucking the evidence away inside this leather tomb. I knew the danger of reading more, but I also knew I couldn't stop. My curiosity had mutated into obsession, and obsession quickly bred recklessness. On the fourth night, I sat cross-legged on my bed with the curtains drawn and the journal open under the glow of a desk lamp. The entry was dated 20 years ago, but the venom was fresh. They think they've buried my hand in her downfall, but I left my fingerprints in every corner. She will never stand tall again. The name beneath that line was Mrs. Kincaid. our neighbor who had lived across the street until her sudden breakdown that left her institutionalized. My heart seized. I remembered Mrs. Kincaid as a kind, quiet woman who baked cookies for us when we were children. All my life I had been told her collapse was just bad luck, illness, the kind of thing no one could explain. Now I was staring at words that suggested my mother had orchestrated it like a stage play. I shut the book, nausea rising, and swore aloud that I would confront someone, anyone. But as soon as the words left my lips, I felt foolish. Who could I even tell? My brother would never believe me. He wanted to preserve our mother's memory as some pillar of strength. Friends would say I was exaggerating, misreading her bitterness as something worse. And yet, the next day at the diner, I caught sight of old Mr. Kincaid sitting alone at the counter, his hands trembling as he lifted his coffee cup. Something inside me urged me forward, reckless again. I asked about his wife, about the past, and his eyes narrowed. "Why are you asking me this after all these years, Emily?" He muttered, voice like gravel. I stumbled over an excuse, but his gaze lingered, heavy with suspicion. "Some things ought to stay buried," he added before walking out, leaving me shaken. From that moment, I knew others remembered, and they didn't want the truth unearthed. Over the following week, small signs of hostility began to appear. A car idled outside my apartment longer than it should have. Notes appeared in my mailbox with no return address, blank pages except for a single blue ink line drawn across the center. When I went to church on Sunday, Mrs. Albright, one of my mother's oldest friends, leaned close as we exchanged greetings and whispered, "Don't you go digging where she told you not to." The words froze my blood. Somehow, without ever telling anyone, they knew what I had done. Or maybe they didn't need to know. Maybe they had lived under the shadow of her manipulations long enough to guess exactly what I was uncovering. That night, I considered burning the journal, taking a match to its pages and letting the blue ink curl into ash. But when I held the lighter over it, my hands shook, and I realized I wasn't ready to lose the only map I had to the truth. Instead, I locked it inside my desk drawer, foolishly thinking that wood and metal could protect me from what was already spilling into my life. A week later, I came home to find my front door slightly ajar. My pulse hammered as I stepped inside, calling out into the silence. Nothing seemed taken, except when I rushed to my desk, I saw the drawer forced open and the journal missing. Panic swallowed me whole. Whoever had been watching knew exactly what they wanted, and they had it now. I searched the apartment until dawn, clawing at every possibility, but the truth was simple. The secrets I had uncovered were no longer mine alone. They were back in circulation, alive again, carried by hands that had once been controlled by my mother. When I finally collapsed into a chair, the sound of my phone vibrating jolted me upright. An unknown number. With trembling fingers I answered, breathless. A woman's voice, low and sharp, slid into my ear. "You were never supposed to see those words. Put them down, Emily, before you end up like the rest." Then silence. The call cut off, leaving only the sound of my own ragged breathing. I sat frozen, staring at the wall, realizing with dread that I wasn't chasing the truth anymore. The truth was chasing me. The morning after the call, I barely slept, pacing my apartment with every light on, waiting for another intrusion, another voice in the dark. Fear had begun to calcify into paranoia, and yet beneath it, a harder layer was forming, defiance. Whoever was pulling strings had underestimated one thing. I wasn't going to let myself be silenced like the others. But I needed help, someone who wouldn't dismiss me, someone who didn't carry nostalgia for my mother's charm. That someone appeared in the most unexpected place. At the library 2 days later, I was searching through the archives for old newspaper clippings about the Kincaids when I felt a presence hovering nearby. A man, maybe early 30s, with dark hair tied back and a wary expression, leaned over the counter. "You shouldn't be digging into that," he said quietly, glancing at the folder in my hands. My stomach dropped. For a split second I thought he was another threat, but then his eyes softened. "I knew your mother," he added, voice carrying a bitterness that made my breath catch. His name was Daniel. He had been a teenager when my mother's schemes were at their height, and his family had been collateral damage in ways he didn't want to detail at first. He guided me to a quiet corner of the library, lowering his voice as he explained, "She ruined my uncle, got him fired, spread rumors, stripped him of every ally he had in town. He left for good, died alone a few years back. She left scars everywhere she touched. I told him about the journal, about the break-in, about the call, and instead of disbelief or dismissal, his jaw tightened with recognition. "You're not the first she left warnings for," he muttered. "My aunt found a note once, blue ink, same as what you said. It's like a calling card." For the first time since opening the journal, I felt less alone, though the relief was tangled with dread. Daniel wasn't just validating me. He was confirming that a web much bigger than I imagined still stretched across this town. He offered to help me dig, not out of kindness, but out of vengeance. "If you're brave enough to keep going, I'll stand with you," he said, his hand trembling slightly as he pushed a stack of photocopied articles toward me. That night we pored over them in my apartment, tracing patterns I hadn't seen before. Different scandals, bankruptcies, divorces, suicides, all orbiting around the years when my mother was most active. She hadn't merely lashed out at rivals. She had orchestrated collapse after collapse, leaving bodies in her wake while keeping her reputation intact. Every entry in her journal wasn't just a confession. It was a blueprint. The more I read, the more I felt her voice in the room, smug and calculating. At one point, Daniel slammed his fist on the table. "She didn't just ruin people. She trained others to keep it going." His words echoed in my mind. Could that be why the journal had been stolen? Not to protect her legacy, but to preserve a tradition, a secret society of manipulation? The thought chilled me, especially when Daniel revealed something he had been holding back, a letter his aunt had hidden, written in the same blue ink, signed with my mother's initials. It warned of consequences if certain names were ever spoken aloud. When he slid it across the table, I felt my blood run cold. It wasn't paranoia. This was a network, and I had tripped straight into its center. Our digging came at a price. By the end of the week, Daniel's car was vandalized, windows shattered, blue paint splashed across the hood like a warning shot. At my apartment, a second intrusion left nothing taken, but every drawer pulled open, every cabinet emptied, like someone wanted me to know I was being watched. Fear gnawed at us, but in a strange way it bound us tighter. We started meeting in secret, choosing random places out of town, using burner phones Daniel insisted on buying. And in those late-night sessions of whispered theories and frantic cross-referencing, I began to sense something dangerous: hope. Hope that maybe we could finish what the journal had started by exposing it all, dragging the truth into the daylight where no one could deny it. That hope crystallized when Daniel uncovered a name circled in the journal more than once: Margaret Albright, my mother's closest friend, the same woman who had whispered her warning in church. The entries hinted at something deeper than friendship, partnership. She wasn't just complicit, Daniel said, voice sharp. She was her right hand. Suddenly the picture shifted. Margaret wasn't simply another bystander guarding secrets. She was an architect of the same cruelty, perhaps even the current keeper of the network. And if the journal was stolen, Margaret was the most likely culprit. The revelation hit me like a blow. Memories flooded back of Margaret's comforting smile at my mother's funeral, the way she squeezed my hand as if shielding me. All an act, all camouflage. Daniel's eyes burned as he leaned across the table. "We can't wait for them to silence us. We have to go to her. Make her admit what she's hiding." The idea terrified me, but the conviction in his voice pulled me in. We agreed to confront Margaret, not with anger, but with strategy. If she thought we were naive, maybe she'd let something slip. As we planned, I caught myself staring at Daniel's face in the dim light, the fire in his expression. I realized that in my mother's shadow, I had found someone who carried his own scars, and together those scars had turned into resolve. But even as we set the plan, I couldn't shake the feeling we were stepping into a trap she had laid years ago, one my mother had written about with that cold, meticulous hand. The only way to know who holds the blade is to walk willingly into its shadow. The night we chose to confront Margaret, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. My face looked older, hollowed out by sleepless nights, my hands trembling as I tried to fasten the buttons of my coat. Daniel waited outside in his dented sedan, the smell of spray paint still clinging to the upholstery. As we drove through the dark streets toward Margaret's house, a suffocating silence stretched between us. It wasn't hesitation anymore, it was dread. We both knew this meeting would either break the dam or drown us completely. Margaret lived on the edge of town in a house that seemed untouched by time. White siding, pristine shutters, flower beds trimmed with military precision. The perfection felt mocking, as though it had been maintained not out of pride but control. When she opened the door, her expression flickered for only a second before she pulled on a warm smile. "Emily," she said softly, eyes sliding to Daniel with a flicker of recognition. "And you've brought a friend." Inside, the air smelled of lavender and something sharper beneath, like bleach. She led us to the sitting room where porcelain figurines lined the shelves, all staring with painted eyes. I tried to steady my voice as I placed the journal on the coffee table. "You know why we're here." Margaret didn't look surprised. She poured tea as though we were discussing weather. "I wondered when you'd come," she said, her tone low, calm, calculated. "That journal, it should never have resurfaced." Daniel leaned forward, fists clenched. "You were part of it. All those people, ruined. My family." Margaret cut him off with a glance sharp enough to slice the air. "Your family," she said coldly, "made enemies long before me or your mother intervened. Actions have consequences, young man." Her words slithered through me, not defensive but dismissive, as if cruelty were simply a natural law. I demanded answers, voice rising despite myself. Why did she write it all down? Why leave me with this? Margaret finally turned to me fully, her eyes dark and unblinking. "Because she wanted you to understand the cost of power." "You think she was confessing?" "No, Emily. She was instructing." The room spun. Instruction. Every line of venomous blue ink wasn't guilt, it was legacy. My chest tightened as Margaret leaned closer, her voice almost tender. "You could carry it on. People will always need someone to decide their fate. Better you than the wrong hands." Daniel exploded, slamming his palm on the table. "She's lying. She just wants you trapped the way they trapped my uncle." His voice cracked, the rawness in it slicing through my fog. Margaret's expression didn't falter. She simply sipped her tea and said, "You've already attracted attention, Emily. Doors left open, phones ringing in the night. You think that's random? They're testing you, seeing if you're strong enough to survive what your mother began." The words hollowed me out. Suddenly, all the intrusions felt orchestrated, not to scare me away, but to draw me deeper. Daniel gripped my shoulder. "Don't listen. This is how they pull you in." But Margaret's gaze locked onto mine, unblinking, steady. "It's already begun." Before we could respond, a sound shattered the moment, a crash of glass from the back of the house. Margaret rose calmly, as if expecting it. Daniel bolted to the kitchen while I froze, heart hammering, until he shouted, "There's nothing here. The window's broken, but no one's outside." Margaret's smile was thin, knowing. "They're reminding us the clock is ticking." Fear flooded me so intensely I could barely breathe. I grabbed the journal from the table, but Margaret's hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. Her nails dug into my skin. "If you leave with that," she hissed, "you will not last the week." I yanked free, my pulse roaring in my ears, and Daniel pulled me toward the door. Margaret didn't stop us. She simply called after me, her voice chilling in its certainty. "You'll come back, Emily." They all do. Outside, the air was bitter and the street eerily quiet. We drove in silence until Daniel finally whispered, "She's in deeper than we thought. This isn't just about your mother. It's about everyone who ever touched that journal." He was right. The journal wasn't a relic. It was currency, and I was holding it in my hands while shadows closed in from every side. That night, my apartment was no longer safe. We fled to a motel on the outskirts, blinds drawn tight, the journal open on the bed between us. Each page we turned seemed heavier than the last, until one entry stopped us cold. In neat blue letters, my mother had written, "If they ever come for you, trust no one, not even the ones who bleed with you." My eyes darted to Daniel, and for a heartbeat suspicion flashed sharp and uninvited. His face, so full of rage and grief, now looked unreadable. He caught my stare and shook his head, voice hoarse. "Don't. That's what they want. They turn us against each other. That's how it survives." I wanted to believe him, but paranoia gnawed at the edges of my mind. Sleep never came. By dawn, I was vibrating with exhaustion, the journal still clutched in my hands. When I stepped outside to breathe, I found a slip of paper tucked beneath the motel door. My blood ran cold at the sight of the handwriting. Blue ink. "Stop digging, or you'll inherit more than her words." The note in blue ink burned in my pocket the entire drive back into the city. Every mile I felt as though eyes pressed against the back of my skull, shadows shifting with each streetlight. Daniel tried to reassure me, his voice low and steady, but I caught the tremor underneath it. "They're trying to break you, Emily," he said. "But if we get ahead of them, if we find who's pulling Margaret's strings, we can end it." End it. The phrase echoed like a hollow bell. We parked near the river where the city swallowed its secrets in black water, and there, with the dawn bleeding across the horizon, we planned. Margaret had offered her house as a sanctuary, but it was bait. The note proved that whoever they were, they had reached far beyond her. Daniel's contacts whispered about a gathering that night, something like a council, quiet but powerful, held in a derelict theater long abandoned after a fire decades ago. If the journal had ever dictated moves in the past, this would be the stage for its future. My stomach churned as we approached the crumbling facade of the theater at nightfall. Windows shattered, doors chained, graffiti covering brick, but a faint glow seeped through the cracks. We found an unlatched side door and slipped inside, the air thick with mold and dust. The auditorium was gutted, rows of broken chairs facing a makeshift stage where a circle of figures sat in heavy silence. Margaret was there, her profile sharp against the dim light, and beside her sat others I recognized only from photographs in the journal, names whispered like curses, bankers, lawyers, neighbors whose faces had once seemed benign. Now they were the architecture of a hidden order. My pulse pounded so loudly I feared it would give us away. Then Margaret's voice cut through the dark. "Emily, Daniel, you can come out now. Did you really think we wouldn't know?" The theater fell silent as every head turned toward us. I felt Daniel's hand tense around mine before he stepped forward. "This ends tonight," he said, voice strong though his eyes betrayed fear. Margaret rose with an elegance that seemed inhuman, her smile calm. "On the contrary," she replied, "this is only the beginning. Your mother stood here once, Emily. She held the journal just as you do now, and she chose to wield it rather than burn it. That is why you exist, because she understood legacy." My throat tightened. I wanted to scream at her, to deny every word, but the faces around the circle leaned forward, hungry, waiting. Margaret extended her hand toward me. "Bring it to me. Join us, and you will never be powerless again." Daniel yanked the journal from my bag before I could move, holding it high like a weapon. "She's not like her," he shouted. "She won't be part of this." His defiance cracked the stillness, but the circle did not flinch. One man stood, tall and severe, voice booming. "The ink is already in her blood. If she refuses, the words will consume her." The room spun. My breath came shallow. I could feel it. The weight of the journal, the way the blue ink seemed to pulse against my skin when I touched its pages. Margaret's hand was still outstretched, her voice almost motherly now. "Choose wisely, Emily. Destroy it, and you destroy yourself. Embrace it, and you rule." The theater blurred with whispers, an echo chamber of temptation and threat. Daniel's grip tightened on the journal, but Margaret's eyes flicked to him, and suddenly 2 men from the circle moved swiftly, restraining him. He struggled, shouting my name, as they tore the journal from his hands and placed it at my feet. The silence after his cries was suffocating. Every gaze pinned me down. My heart raced, torn between 2 unbearable paths. If I reached for the journal, I would inherit everything. My mother's sins, Margaret's promises, the blood-soaked power that had destroyed lives. If I refused, they would destroy Daniel, maybe me, and still the words would outlive us both. I bent down slowly, fingers brushing the worn cover, and a chill shot up my arm. Pages fluttered open by themselves, as if alive. I read a single line, fresh ink glistening as though written in that very moment. "You cannot escape what you are meant to carry." I gasped, jerking my hand back, but the circle leaned closer, expectant. Daniel's voice cut through the suffocating haze, raw and desperate. "Emily, don't. That book killed my family. Don't let it take you too." His words trembled with truth, but Margaret's voice followed immediately, soothing and cold. "Listen to him, and you'll die with nothing. Listen to me, and you will never be at the mercy of anyone again." My chest felt like it would split open. Tears blurred my vision. I reached down again, my hand hovering above the journal, and whispered, "What if I choose neither?" The circle murmured, restless. The tall man snarled, "There is no third path." But in that instant, a spark lit inside me. A realization that maybe the journal's power was not in obedience but in choice. My mother had written her venom willingly. I could write differently. With trembling hands, I seized the journal and tore out the last page, the fresh line that had bound me in fear. Gasps rippled through the theater. Margaret's calm cracked for the first time. "What are you doing?" she hissed. I raised the torn page high, the fragile paper shaking. "If ink is power," I said, voice breaking but strong enough to echo, "then I will decide what is written." The circle erupted, some shouting in anger, others in awe. Daniel wrestled free amid the chaos and sprinted to my side. We bolted toward the exit as the theater descended into turmoil, voices clashing, footsteps pounding. Behind us, Margaret screamed my name, her fury shaking the rafters. "You cannot run from what you are." The night air hit like ice as we stumbled into the street, lungs burning. Sirens wailed in the distance. Though whether they were real or imagined, I couldn't tell. Daniel clutched my arm, eyes wild. "You didn't choose them. You didn't choose her. You chose you." But as I looked down at the torn page crumpled in my fist, the ink still shimmering like blood under the streetlights, I wasn't sure if I had saved us or doomed us both. The night swallowed us whole as we ran, our footsteps echoing off the empty streets like gunshots. Daniel clutched my hand so tightly it hurt, but I welcomed the pain because it reminded me I was still alive, still moving forward, not trapped inside that rotting theater of whispers and lies. We didn't stop until we reached his apartment, a cramped second-floor walk-up where the curtains were always drawn and the neighbors minded their own business. He slammed the door behind us, slid the deadbolt into place, and collapsed against the wall, his chest heaving. For a long moment neither of us spoke, the silence punctuated only by our ragged breathing. Then I opened my hand. The torn page from the journal was still there, crumpled and damp with sweat, the ink glistening faintly like veins under pale skin. Daniel's eyes fixed on it, his voice hoarse. "Burn it, Emily. Please, just burn it." I stared at the paper, at the words that seemed to writhe even in stillness. "You cannot escape what you are meant to carry." My fingers trembled. I wanted to toss it into the nearest flame, to erase it forever, but something inside me hesitated. Destroying it wouldn't erase the truth of what had been written, my mother's betrayals, Margaret's poison, the circle's obsession. The ink might burn, but the legacy would smolder beneath the ashes. I folded the page carefully and slid it into my pocket. Daniel swore under his breath, running both hands through his hair. "You don't understand. As long as that ink exists, they'll come for you. For us." I met his gaze, tears stinging my eyes. "And if I destroy it, will they stop? Or will they hunt me anyway, because they believe I carry it in me now?" He had no answer, only silence and fear. Days bled into nights after that, a haze of paranoia and whispers. We moved apartments twice, changed phone numbers, used cash instead of cards. And still I felt it, that watchful presence, eyes lingering too long in a crowd, shadows stretching too far against the walls. Margaret's voice haunted me in dreams, promising power if I surrendered, death if I resisted. The torn page weighed heavier than any stone, a reminder that I had made a choice but not escaped its cost. One evening, weeks later, I found Daniel at the kitchen table, staring at the folded page I had hidden inside a drawer. He looked up, eyes red-rimmed. "This thing is tearing you apart. Tearing us apart." His hand hovered over the lighter on the table. "If you can't do it, I will." A surge of panic ripped through me. I snatched the page away, clutching it to my chest. "No, it's mine. If anyone destroys it, it has to be me." He slammed his fist against the table, the sound cracking like thunder. "Why, Emily? What are you protecting? A curse? A lie? You think holding on to it gives you control, but it doesn't. It owns you." His words stabbed deep, but I couldn't let go. Because he was wrong. Or maybe he was right. But letting him destroy it felt like surrendering the last piece of agency I had left. That night we barely spoke. He slept on the couch, restless, and I lay awake in the bedroom, the torn page pressed against my palm. Sometime past midnight, I rose and went to the window, staring at the city lights flickering like dying stars. I unfolded the paper and stared at the words until they blurred. Then, with a pen trembling in my hand, I added a line beneath them. "What I choose to carry is mine alone." The ink bled into the page, black against blue, two truths colliding. For a moment, I felt a strange quiet inside me, as though I had rewritten not just the paper but myself. The next morning Daniel found me at the table, the page laid flat before me. He read the new line, his jaw tight. "You think that changes anything?" I met his gaze, voice steady. "It changes me. And maybe that's enough." He didn't argue, but the distance in his eyes told me he didn't believe. That afternoon he packed a bag. He said he needed space, that he couldn't fight shadows forever, that he loved me, but love wasn't enough. He left with a promise to call. He never did. Alone now, I returned to the page again and again, reading the two sentences as though they were scripture. "You cannot escape what you are meant to carry. What I choose to carry is mine alone." They warred against each other, one binding me to a fate written before my birth, the other clawing for freedom. Which was true? Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe truth was less important than endurance. One night, months later, I stood on the edge of the same river where the journals had first surfaced. The city hummed behind me, the water black and endless before me. In my hand, the torn page fluttered in the wind. I thought of my mother, of Margaret, of Daniel. I thought of the circle in the theater, waiting, believing the ink would one day return to them. I thought of how much of my life had been dictated by words not my own. And then, with a breath that felt like the breaking of chains, I let the page slip from my fingers. It spiraled down, caught by the current, vanishing into the darkness. For the first time in months, my chest loosened. The voices hushed. I turned away from the river, the city lights ahead like uncertain stars. I knew they would come for me again, Margaret, or others like her. I knew the ink's shadow would never fully fade. But I also knew something else. I was not just a vessel. I was the hand that could write. The story was no longer only theirs. It was mine. And if that meant burning in whatever hell awaited, then at least the fire would be mine too.